Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for Remembrance Sunday, November the 5th of 2023, a day when we set some time aside to remember and to be thankful for the veterans and those who fought and gave their lives in war, protecting this country of Canada. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month every year, our country comes to a virtual standstill as Canadians collectively and individually become motionless and observe a moment of silence together. With an artificial poppy pinned to the upper garment, we remember those that sacrificed their lives in defense of the peace that we enjoy in our country. The country they cherished so much and were so proud to call home. This day is known as Remembrance Sunday, and this coming Saturday will be Remembrance Day. Originally, Remembrance Day was called Armistice Day. It was first conducted in 1919 throughout the Commonwealth in commemoration of the end of the First World War, which officially took place on November the 11th of 1918 at 11 a.m. From 1923 till 1931, Armistice Day was held on the Monday of the week in which November the 11th fell, the same day as Canadian Thanksgiving at that time. In 1931, an independent member of Parliament from British Columbia, Alan Neil, published a bill, or proposed a bill, to hold Armistice Day on November the 11th. He also proposed that the word armistice should be replaced with remembrance. The bill was approved, and in that year, Remembrance Day was officially observed on November the 11th. Some people may wonder just why we continue to gather when this country has not seen war in many years. I think that there is no better reason to gather, to wear a poppy, and to remember. No better reason than to just remember those who fell. In fact, the fact that my generation has not known world war is due in large measure to the sacrifice of these military veterans in years gone by, and to their comrades since deceased, and to their fallen comrades who gave the ultimate sacrifice. It's important that we remember. Heather Robinson writes in her book entitled The Terrible Beauty, The Art of Canada at War. She writes this, and I quote, "We must remember. If we do not, the sacrifice of those 100,000 Canadian lives will be meaningless. They died for us, their homes and their families and their friends. They died for a collection of traditions that they cherished and for a future that they believed in. They died for Canada. The meaning of their sacrifice rests in our collective national consciousness. Our future is their monument. We must remember." But remembering is something that most of us have a hard time with. Forgetting comes easily to most of us, and it seems the older we get, the more forgetful we get, the less that we're able to remember. How many of you have experienced walking into a room and then forgetting what you're there for? Why did I come in here? What was I looking for? You retrace your steps and you try to remember, or you make a shopping list. so that you won't forget the things you need at the grocery store or at the mall, and then you go to the store and you forget to bring the list with you. That's never happened to you, has it? There's a story about an elderly couple who were having problems with their memory. They lived in a seniors complex, and they saw each other regularly. They enjoyed doing things together. They enjoyed each other's company. One day, the gentleman decided that he was going to ask his lady friend to marry him. Well, that evening, he got up the courage to ask her, but when he woke up the next morning, he could not remember what her answer was. He could remember asking her, but he couldn't remember if she had said yes or no to his proposal. So he swallowed his pride and he went to his lady friend's home and knocked on the door, and she answered the door, and he confessed, "Darling, I know that I asked you to marry me last night, but my memory is so bad I can't remember if you said yes or no." The lady friend replied to him. She said, "Oh, thank goodness. I got up this morning and I could remember saying yes to someone, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember who it was." Well, we all have difficulty with memory, don't we? And for that reason, I want us to focus for a few moments this morning on what it means to remember on this day we call Remembrance Sunday, or Saturday will be Remembrance Day. What do we remember? How do we remember? Why do we remember? Well, first of all, we remember the past. I would say that none of us here today would remember Armistice Day in 1918. A few of us can remember VE Day 1945, but it too is a fast fading memory. What we do remember, of course, are the soldiers killed recently in Afghanistan, but in remembering those 158 men who lost their lives and many others who were wounded physically and psychologically in the conflict, let us also remember the 66,661 Canadians who fought and died against an aggressor in World War I. Another 42,000 who died in World War II. And another 300 plus in the Korean War. We need to remember what they fought for. We need to remember the conditions they fought under. We need to remember the courage in the fight for freedom and their willingness to sacrifice even their own lives to preserve that freedom that we enjoy. Jesus said, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends." Our veterans are getting fewer in number. There are not many left who have experienced the horrors of a world war. But I want to say to veterans today that the up-and-coming generations need your help so that they can remember. We need for veterans, as tough as it is to talk about the things of war, we need them to tell their stories. The things they experienced, the things they saw. We need for children to know that there's no glory in war. There's no glory in standing in a trench of ice-cold water day after day in the freezing cold, with men huddled in together at night to try to keep warm. There's no glory in seeing your comrade die next to you, or leaving your friend behind on the battlefield. In fact, there's no glory even in seeing the enemy die. A few years ago, I had taken my stepfather to the regional hospital in Sydney, Nova Scotia, to have a procedure done. And I was talking with a nurse at that point. She was telling me about a patient that she had been tending to earlier in the day. She said he was a sweet old guy. He arrived in a wheelchair, and when she asked him to transfer to the hospital bed, she noticed that he was missing a foot. She asked him if he had diabetes, thinking that might be how he lost his foot. "No," he replied. I lost my foot in the war. And then he proceeded to tell the story of searching through an area, seeking out enemy troops. He said, I came around a corner and I was face to face with an enemy soldier. He said, we looked at each other for what seemed to be a long time. We had startled each other. He said, I wasn't very old myself, but he was just a kid. Then he said, we heard someone coming and both of us fired our rifles. He took my foot. I took his life, he said. She said, as he finished telling that story, she looked at him and there was a tear rolling from his eye. There's no glory in war. There's no glory in war. But it's important for us to hear these stories so that we can remember the past. George Santayana said that if we cannot remember the past, we are doomed to repeat it. I don't think any of us want to repeat that part of our history. So we have an obligation to remember the past. But Remembrance Day is only partially about remembering the past and remembering those who died in the horrors of war. It's also about remembering the present. It's about looking around today and recognizing the freedom that we enjoy as Canadians and proudly recognizing that Canadians are known far and wide as a peace-loving people. Our servicemen and women serving today in many areas of the world on peacekeeping missions. Even our presence in Afghanistan was mainly a mission to bring peace to that troubled country so that the citizens could be free to enjoy life without fear or threat. I pastored a church in Wainwright, Alberta back in the late 1980s. Wainwright, Alberta is the home of Camp Wainwright, one of the Canadian Army's primary military training locations, and it was not uncommon to see Army vehicles and Army personnel throughout the community at times. One day, our oldest son was with me. He now has 20 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, 8 years in the Navy, and 12 years now in the Air Force. He's stationed at Greenwood, Nova Scotia. It was a week before Remembrance Day, and I took him to the post office with me. He would have been maybe 3 or 4 years old at the time. As I was getting the mail, there were 2 servicemen in full combat gear there in the lobby of the post office, standing at attention. David walked over to them and looked them up and down, and never one to keep his thoughts to himself. David said to one of them, he said, "Do you guys kill people with those guns?" One of the soldiers got down on one knee so that he was at eye level with my son. And he replied, "No, son. We protect people with these guns." Peacekeeping is an important aspect of Canada's national heritage. It's a reflection of our fundamental beliefs as a peaceful people. Our Canadian military today is building upon our established peacekeeping tradition to make strong and imaginative contributions to international peace and security. Canadian forces have been involved in over 80 peacekeeping operations around the world since the end of World War II. I believe they're involved in about 12 missions even right now today. Over 70 years of experience in peacekeeping and participating in an overwhelming majority of peacekeeping missions that have been mandated by the United Nations Security Council. All that has established an international reputation for Canada. So as we remember the present, we can thank God for the peace and the freedom that we enjoy. The peace and the freedom that our veterans fought for in the years past. And we can also thank God for our present day servicemen and women who are welcomed and respected around the world. Well, Remembrance Day is not only about remembering the past, those that have died. It's also about remembering the present and the peace and the freedom that we enjoy today, and the reputation of our military personnel in maintaining that peace and freedom internationally. And then finally, Remembrance Day is also about remembering the future. It's stating the obvious to say that we best honor those who have died by living carefully and sensibly in the present in order that the future may be secure. One of the most remarkable things that Moses says to the people of Israel once they have left Egypt, he commands them, "Do not despise an Egyptian, for you were strangers in his land." Of the very people who had caused the Israelites so much misery, so much suffering for so long, Moses commands, "Do not despise an Egyptian." Moses suggests that to be free is not merely to be liberated from a tyrant, but it is to refuse to be held captive by the memory of that tyrant. We must remember, we must honor those who died in war, but we must also honor them by how we live today. If Remembrance Day tells us nothing else, it should tell us this: we have a duty to the future, no less than to the past. If we are not prepared to link our act of remembrance with the future, then our remembering is robbed of its power and its relevance. Remembrance Day teaches us that we must work tirelessly for peace, and that means working tirelessly not so much with our friends as with our enemies, past and potential, working together for peace. Remembrance Day is about remembering the past, the present, and the future. May God grant us the ability to remember well. At the end of formal Legion gatherings, there is a closing ritual that's used from the words of Rudyard Kipling. They say together, "Lord of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget." God bless. Have a wonderful day, and remember to take part in the Remembrance Day ceremonies this coming Saturday in your neighborhood. God bless. Have a wonderful day. Until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.